Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sober Yoga Girl. I am super excited for this particular episode because I have a guest with me who is not only in the sober world, but also really aligned with the path of yoga and the yoga work that we do at the Mindful Life Practice and Sober Curious Yoga. So I have with me today Sophie, who is a recovery coach. She also works full-time as a brand strategist. She founded the Woof You Feed, and she was raised in Switzerland and the UK, but she's currently living in Australia. So welcome to the show, Sophie. How are you today?
Hi, Alex. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be on the show.
My pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
So let's start off by you just kind of giving me a bit of context. Tell me about you, your history, your childhood, and how you ended up from Switzerland and the UK all the way to Australia.
Sure. So I was born in Oxford in the UK. And when I was 2, we moved over to Switzerland. So my parents, actually, my dad is Iranian, my mum is Swedish. They met in the UK. And for work, my dad then, had to move over to Switzerland. So I've got 2 brothers and a sister, and the 6 of us went over to Switzerland. We were there for about 10 or so years, where we grew up and had an amazing childhood, lots of outdoor skiing, snowboarding, lots of fun stuff outdoors in the mountains. And then I moved back over to the UK when I was about 12 years old, and I was there through secondary school, college, went to university, and had a few jobs in London, worked there for a few years. I'd done a lot of traveling around the world, and my sister had been living in Australia, so I'd visited her a couple of times, and actually had a partner over in Melbourne at one point, and had decided that I just really was ready for a change. Quite a lot of that was to do with my sort of addiction journey and feeling like I really needed a bit of a reset. And so I went through the process of getting a visa, which took a good 18 months, nearly 2 years to get done. Finally got that through and then made the move. So that was just over 2 years ago, May 2019.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then you never looked back. You've been there ever since.
Ever since, yeah. And actually I had lots of plans to go back and visit regularly, but obviously with COVID, that's changed things a lot. So in my first year, I did quite a lot of travel around regionally in Victoria, which is where I am. I'm about 20 or so minutes away from the Great Ocean Road. So lots of, beautiful scenery and adventures to be had around there. So the first year was spent doing lots of adventuring, and then COVID sort of came into play just as I was about to go to Bali on holiday. Decided not to go, which is probably a good thing because I'd probably still be there now.
Yeah.
But then obviously that put off any sort of travel back to Europe. So I've not actually been back since I got here, which has been quite challenging. Yeah.
Wow, that's hard.
Yeah. So I moved here with my dog, Echo. He's a husky, so he came with me. So he's my family rock over in Australia, but everyone else is back in Europe. My little brother actually is in LA. My mum's in Spain. My dad and my older brother are in Switzerland, and my sister is in Switzerland and the UK at the moment. So
what a global family.
Yeah, my neighbour calls me United Nations.
That's amazing. Well, I'm glad that you have your dog Echo with you, because I know how hard it can be. I've been separated from my family for the entire pandemic as well. And I have a cat, Princess, and she has been kind of an anchor for me through this. So
yeah, they're amazing for that, aren't they? I think I've seen her actually on your Instagram.
Yeah. So let's get a little bit into your journey with alcohol. When did you start drinking, and how did your relationship unfold with drinking over time?
Yeah, so drinking for me started quite early teens, I'd say, sort of secondary school age in England, probably 14 or so. Alcohol had always been a part of my life. It was something that was in, my family drank, not in a excessive way or anything like that, but it was just always around. Maybe someone having a beer or wine with dinner or all of that sort of stuff. So it wasn't anything that was new. But in England, it's fairly cultural to have alcohol, around even from an early age. And so when we would have school discos and things like that, that would be the opportunity at our age to sort of, at the time it would be sharing a beer, probably very minimal amounts, but with fairly strong effects. So that was the introduction to it. It sort of just seemed very normal. It wasn't a bad crowd or anything like that I'd fallen into. It was just very normal and everyone seemed to do it. And that carried on through college and then university again. That probably got a little bit stronger in many ways, probably at legal age as well, to go out to bars and things like that. Everyone doing the same thing. And when I finished university, I've always been into food and restaurants and things like that. And I decided after university that I really wanted to go into pub and restaurant management. And that was a little bit of a springboard really for the drinking career, because you're surrounded by it constantly. Even if guests are coming in maybe once a week and having a couple of drinks, you're around every single person that's coming in. So it's there, every lunchtime, every evening. So it got very normal to get bought a drink or offered a drink or finish a shift and have a few more to wind down, all of that sort of thing. And actually I'd also worked in pubs in my teens, so it was a very natural environment to be around, and having the bar there all open and all of that sort of thing, it was just very normal. And I got very accustomed to being around very drunk people, or people also that were just doing it socially. So it was just the norm. Right. And I think over time, the tolerance obviously grew. Having a drink just became the norm. But from the other aspect as well, it's a very, very stressful environment. The hours are very long. It's very hard work, physically. A way to relax after a shift can be to have a few drinks to sort of release a lot of that. But on the other side as well, when you have a day off, which it can be quite rare, it's sort of make up time for the weekend that I felt like I'd lost. So on a Monday or Tuesday, which was a day off, essentially, it would be, okay, what can I go and do? I'll go to a restaurant and I'll do what people always do when they come to this restaurant. So that's where it all sort of started and really started to get out of control as well, to be honest, because that's where the volume grew quite substantially.
Right. I can imagine being in a work environment where you're around it all the time. Like I hear of so many people who talk about working in, the alcohol industry in some form, events or whatever, and it just becomes so the norm. And as you say, these guests might be coming in 1-2 times a week, but you're the constant. You're there every day around it and it's part of it.
Absolutely. And also what starts to creep in is the realization how quickly you can get through a hangover, because hair of the dog, a drink the next day is so accessible and easily available. So what started to happen was, on the hangover days, struggle through a hangover until it was an acceptable time to have a drink to kind of, get rid of the hangover or sort of top up, essentially. I suppose that's what's happening in the blood, isn't it? But that time got earlier and earlier. And because it was so accessible, and actually because a lot of people in that industry are in a similar boat, it starts to get quite normal to then go, oh, should we just have the Bloody Mary this morning? And so suddenly drinking in the day can become drinking in the morning. So actually you're sort of topping up, and then by the evening I was feeling fine and good again, and the cycle would then continue. That's probably where it really started sort of ramping up that sort of part of my life. I actually then left that industry because it was just too much and very unhealthy mentally and physically. But the drinking remained. Obviously, it was sort of part of the lifestyle then.
Right. Yeah. So tell me about where was a point when you started to think, maybe I need to quit, or what was that sort of turning point for you when you started to realize that it wasn't healthy?
Yeah, good question. And actually it started creeping in where people would start commenting things, oh, you're drinking really quickly, or do you remember what you did last night? And at the beginning, I could laugh it off as a kind of a one-off, but those one-offs became very, very frequent. And I was noticing myself that I was having these blackout memory losses, but still it wasn't enough. So I kind of had this, it was a sort of deep, dark sinking feeling that I knew something was up, but I didn't have enough drive to go, okay, that's too much, I'm going to stop. I think the alcohol had taken over by that point, and I was looking for every reason not to stop, and that it could be other things, maybe it's just an allergy, or maybe I just need to slow down, and all of those sorts of things. And because other people were commenting on it, it actually started to bring on some shame around the drinking. And my coping mechanism with that was, instead of cutting out the drinking, was to start doing it secretly. So, for example, if I had dinners with friends, to get to the level that I wanted to be at with my drinking, or the effects of the feelings of the drinking, I would have a quick glass of wine in the kitchen before we sat down, so that I would feel like I wasn't drinking super quickly during dinner, but I was at the level where I was feeling comfortable and confident and in my sort of jokey, relaxed state of being. And that's actually when that kind of secret drinking started to, get quite extreme, because I realized I could carry on doing something that I perceived as something that I loved without anyone judging me for it.
So it was like the comments that people made, and then the secret drinking. And how long did it go on like that you were drinking secretly?
A long time, actually, a few years, because it just seemed, in my mind, like I was managing it.
Right.
And because I felt like I was managing it, I felt like I had control over it.
Right.
The reality is I really didn't. But that because I had that feeling, I was in a false sense of security that it wasn't an issue, because not everyone, some people were still mentioning it, close family members, close friends, but generally on the outside, I wasn't coming across as I'd started coming across. So I kind of felt like I was back in a safety zone. However, with tolerances, growing and growing, that amount, the volume that was happening at, was growing as well. So it became this kind of, horrible secret, really. And with that, shame grew. And unfortunately, as a result of the shame, I was wanting to block it out even more. Mm-hmm. So the cycle just went in circles, really.
And so was there a big turning point or a moment when you just decided, enough is enough?
There were many. Mm-hmm. And I tried many times. So there were a few times where that did happen, where, either I sat myself down, or I got myself into a really dodgy situation, or a friend or family member would sit me down, and that would be a turning point. And I sort of went through the book of, all the different options. So cutting down for a week, just working on, just drinking on Sundays, or after 7 p.m, or just one glass. But inevitably, as you can probably imagine, those rules started getting very bendy, and they ended up being very rubbery, and, ended up just, what would happen actually is I would do it for a period of time, even up to a month, complete abstinence. But then the celebration would come, and I'd be like, hey, cool, I've just done a month. That means I haven't got an issue. Let's go to the pub. And then that would be the start of quite a big relapse session that could last for a couple of weeks or a month. And then I'd go through the cycle again. So that happened quite a few times. Not the greatest results, because each time it seemed to get heavier and harder. And, both in the amount that I drank, but also the effects that I felt afterwards. And because those effects were getting stronger and more extreme in terms of the hangovers, the anxiety, all of that sort of stuff, I would then naturally start turning to drink again to pull me out of it, because it was habitual by that point. It was my complete crutch, and I relied on it to pull me out of, ironically, how I'd got into that situation. So I was on this roundabout, and there was a point actually where my older brother came over and met with me, and we went away for the weekend, and we had a really, really amazing chat. And, he really voiced his concerns, and that's when I agreed to go to a rehab and do a month at rehab. I'd got to the brink of exhaustion and physical health and all of those sorts of things. And so I decided to go, and I went to a rehab in Thailand for 5.5 weeks, which was a very difficult, challenging, yet amazing experience, and definitely the beginning of my recovery journey, which was 4 years ago, coming up to 4 years ago. It wasn't the beginning of my abstinence, though, but it was certainly the beginning of my recovery. And I'm actually a real believer in celebrating recovery rather than just the abstinence, because there's real strength in getting onto that journey. And I sometimes feel like even though it's a celebration to mark an occasion of abstinence, I think the beginning of the recovery journey is the real marker, because in life we all fall over at points, and it's about getting back up again. And if we kept resetting the marker at 0 every time we fell, I don't think it would be the biggest or most empowering way to look back at all the hard work that we've done. So rehab was definitely my marker of the beginning of recovery. And after Thailand, I had a stint of, a really great, clear-minded, incredible journey, clean, no drinking. There was then a relapse. I got back on the horse. I tried to remove all the shame. I had lots of support around, which was great. A lot of things got aired through the rehab process, through treatment. There's a lot of encouragement to talk to people, family, friends that, have been affected along the way as well. So a lot of air had been cleared. So I felt much more open and able to talk to those people when it happened, rather than going back into the shame cave, as I call it. And that really helped me get back up. I was in actually Indonesia at the time, and I remember looking in the mirror and I just couldn't recognize my face. I looked really sad. I had this big puffy moon face, from too much alcohol, really bloated, and physically just felt really weak. And it was a real crash moment. And it was at that point I called a family member who was fortunately Indonesia at the time, and he picked me up. And that's when I was in more of a sort of safehouse environment, and met a recovery coach through him. Actually started going to a few 12-step meetings. And that's when it really ramped up again. And I saw the value of this sort of holistic approach of having a recovery coach. Indonesia, have you been to Bali?
I'm obsessed with Bali. It is my favorite place in the world. I love it.
Yeah. So as a yogi, I'm sure you understand when I say with yoga there, it took on a whole new level. Yoga for me before that was an asana practice for fitness and things like that. And while I was in Bali, I really fell in love with the true sense of how important it could be in my life. And so that's where the recovery really strengthened. I then went back to Europe and saw family and friends. It was a very difficult time because it felt like I was walking back into the shame cave, that all of the bad stuff had happened in Europe. And so I felt really ready to move to Australia. So I made plans and, packed up my stuff. There was still a lot of waiting around and sort of planning and things like that, and other reasons to be in Europe. But then made the move. And yeah, I think for me, Australia has been a really solid space to be in recovery. There's obviously a big drinking restaurant culture, but there's also an amazing outdoor, healthy coffee shop, cafe, walks on the beach kind of lifestyle. And that's the one that I harnessed when I got here. Fortunately, there was a yoga studio right opposite my first apartment. I was there every morning. I was in touch with people in recovery, all these sorts of things. And it just felt really strong while I was here.
Oh, that's amazing. What an inspiring journey and story. And I particularly like what you said about, celebrating the whole journey, not just full abstinence, because I know I have so many clients who just beat themselves up when they've had a slip. And it's like, you have to think about, I'll give me as an example. I quit drinking in 2019, in April of 2019. And after I made it through a year, I actually had a couple of occasions where I had a beer on a staycation, and I'm a sober coach. And people said, I ended up talking about it on social media, and some people said, you're not sober. And I'm like, well, I'm not binge drinking at a bar every day of the week like I used to 2 years ago. So I personally don't think having one beer on a staycation changes this journey that I've been on, right? And we get so shamed for, obviously I don't want to make it into a habit of drinking, and I have to make a plan so that I am staying on this sober path. And right, it's only happened on 2 occasions, but there are so many people that take that as like, oh my God, it's over, I'm starting again at 0. And it's like, in reality, you have put in so much work to get to where you've been. And we need to celebrate all of that, and not just kick ourselves for falling, right? We all fall sometimes.
Absolutely. And it works in so many different areas of life. If you've been focusing on nutrition and then you have a piece of chocolate cake, it doesn't erase all of the hard work that's gone into it.
Absolutely.
And with my recovery, if I'd told myself, oh, I'm back to 0, it would have erased all of that hard work that I'd done. So I celebrate, and I really am proud of myself for all of that hard work that did happen. I think I heard you mention on one of your podcasts that you did 1 year no beer.
Yeah.
There's another movement, actually it's Australian based, called Hello Sunday Morning. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I haven't, no.
And it's great. Basically the whole concept is around celebrating what you can do on a Sunday morning if you're not hungover. So
I love that. I love it.
Actually, I've got the t-shirt on. Funnily enough, I didn't plan it. I just realised that. It's similar to 1 year no beer in the way that it helps people see a life without alcohol. And there's none of these sort of markers of, okay, well, you failed because, you tried and then it didn't work and you had a beer. And I really strongly feel, especially as a recovery coach, that removing that shame from the markers helps people just get back up and be proud of what they've done and be empowered by what they've done, rather than think, well, I've done it once, so what's the point, because I'll just fail again kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to hear more about what your program was like in Thailand, because you're the first person I've ever had on the show that's chosen or that has done a program like that. And I'm just so interested in hearing, all different paths of recovery. So what was that like?
I was really scared on my way. I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been to one. I didn't know anyone that had been to one, or no one had shared it. Having been to one now, I realise so many people go, and it's likely that I probably know people that have been to rehab as well. It was amazing. It was a combination treatment program. So the directors were psychologists, but then there was also a 12-step aspect to it. And then there was a therapy aspect to it as well. So there was a lot of CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, that we did. There was the 12-step aspect that was, we could choose to do that. Some people feel quite strongly against it. So it was encouraged, but not necessary.
Yeah.
We all had a therapist. And then I was very fortunate to go to one that had a beautiful gym and an outdoor pool and all of this sort of stuff. So they really encouraged fitness as part of it as well. There was also a lot of time for personal reflection and doing workbooks. So really working through, the causes, where we think it started. There was one exercise that was particularly hard, actually, where you had to write your obituary, and it was quite extreme. It wasn't a mandatory thing, it was just encouraged, and it is helpful. It was a helpful thing, actually. And then the other thing that was probably most helpful to me was we had to write our life story and share it with the group. And that was really eye-opening, because as well as seeing other people vulnerable and hearing other people's stories, actually voicing one's own story can be very liberating in ways that I didn't even expect. So it was quite an amazing process to go through. And what else did we do? Oh, we also had daily meetings. So all of us would sit, there would be a subject, and then we could go around and offer our thoughts on it and, let the conversation flow, basically. And I think, the main idea with all of this was to allow us to sort of have a voice, grow our self-esteem, find out where things were coming from, why they happened, learn tools to use sort of going forward as well. And everything in between. So it was an amazing experience, actually.
That's fantastic. It sounds so holistic. There's just so many elements to it. And I'm just picturing, what I'm picturing? It's like, so I traveled around Southeast Asia, and I was in Thailand in 2018, right before I got sober, actually. And it's so interesting, because it's like, for me, Southeast Asia, and that part of Southeast Asia in particular, is just like, I just picture myself like stumbling down the street with like buckets of alcohol in my hand, getting home to hostel, 3 a.m., being in some guy's hostel bed. And I'm just like, wow, it's like this part of the world where people go, like me, to like, I'm like finding myself while I'm like backpacking around Southeast Asia, but I'm just like getting drunk the whole time. And your version of Thailand, I'm like, that sounds amazing. Like, it just sounds like that's actually, when people say like, I'm backpacking around Southeast Asia looking for myself, I'm like, that's what people should be doing. Like just like deep reflection, and like, whether or not you're struggling with like addiction, just like that just sounds like you just really had space to find yourself. That sounds like that's what finding yourself should be when you go to Southeast Asia. Anyway. Yeah.
And actually, I mean, there were many confronting parts to it. It was a very tough, it was exhausting in many ways. Mm-hmm. And it was strange being there as well, because people come from so many different backgrounds, and, I started thinking, oh, maybe I haven't got a problem, because I was hearing other people's stories and they felt so extreme compared to mine. I started really questioning things. But as time went on and as therapy went on, things came out, and there was very clear reasons as to why this had been happening. But what you were talking about with traveling around Southeast Asia, the other side of it, I've also experienced that. And it's dangerous, actually, for someone with a drinking issue, because it's so accessible and easy and cheap and all those things. And so I'm happy to have seen those places from this side,
Yeah.
because they started being in that shame cave with the rest of the world that I'd been in. And so it's nice to have seen the other side of the coin.
Yeah, it's like, so the first time I went to Bali, I was on a yoga teacher training, and I was I was still drinking at this point, very preoccupied with like how I was going to get off the yoga retreat resort to have a drink, sneak out and have a drink. And then I went back to Bali a few years later and experienced it sober. And it was just like incredible. And so it's like clarity and contrast, so I would really love to go back to Southeast Asia and do that journey again from sober eyes. I think it would be an incredible, just different experience.
Yeah, and like you were saying about Bali, it's the same there, isn't it? When you see it through sober eyes, it's, the coconuts, the amazing smoothie bowls, the yoga studios, the shalas, the people, everything is just so beautiful in so many ways. So yeah, Southeast Asia, highly recommend doing another trip.
Yeah, definitely, when COVID ends.
Yes.
All right, so tell me about how you became a recovery coach.
So while I was in Bali in my recovery stages, I met a guy through a friend who actually hosts hosts one-to-one recovery programs for executives or, people who need to go and just do something one-on-one. They don't want to go to rehab. They need some discretion. They want to do it privately. And they have specific requests with what they want to do. So the easiest thing for them to do is just have a one-to-one program. So I was asked by him to go and help and be the sober companion with the guest. And I absolutely loved it. And it felt great helping someone, and it also helped me on my recovery. There was a really strong sense of purpose with what I was doing. I could really connect with what I was doing because I had felt it was lived experience. And I saw the changes, the positive changes in that guest. And I'd gone back to Switzerland after that. And then I got asked to go back and help with another guest. So I went over and I worked with someone else there for a few weeks. And again, just absolutely loved it. I'd actually done some yoga teacher training in Bali when I'd been there the last time, while I was there for about 6 months. So with that client, I was doing the sober companionship, but I was also doing yoga teaching one-to-one. And it just connected. It just really resonated. The two things, knowing also how yoga has helped me on my recovery journey, being able to give that opportunity to someone else to experience and help them was really magical. So that was the first flavor of it. I then was focusing on my brand strategy work that I still do now. But that was the main focus when I came to Australia because, I needed full-time work and it's something that I love and my experience in and so on. Then in early 2020, when I was at home during COVID, I thought, how can I use my time as effectively as possible? And that's when I completed my yoga teacher training and also my recovery coaching training, and really knew that it was something that I had to pursue. It was just a really strong calling, if I can call it that without sounding corny, and just needed to pursue it and made the decision and did it and loved the process. There was a substantial amount of hours that I had to do as training, 80 to 100 hours or so. And it was good because it's a good test to see if you actually really like it when you have to do, one-to-ones for that many hours. And I just kept loving it more and more. And my mentors were obviously helping me and sort of mentoring me, coaching me along the way. And I got so much great insight and so on. So yeah, that's where it all started really a few years ago, and then really sort of exploded into something that I had to do.
That's incredible. So how do you work with clients now? What do you do in your programs?
So I do predominantly one-to-one, and there are lots of different ways I help them. So one of the ways that's really helped me in my own recovery is habit forming and goal setting. It's been a huge part of my own recovery. And so that's something that I really like to focus on with clients, because I know how effective it can be. I look at helping them develop a sort of more holistic and balanced way of living, generally. I help them find effective ways to, regulate emotional ups and downs, mindfulness practices. That's where the yoga really comes in. I had a client a few weeks ago who was really nervous before a job interview, and we did some breathing exercises that's sort of come off the back of the yoga training. So they really complement each other in that way, and my methodology with the coaching. But really also I help people identify what their blind spots or triggers might be. If they're feeling wobbly or maybe they can't see something, the types of questions that I ask will often help them find something that actually is, really bothering them, and that's what's caused a ripple effect in their behaviours. I really love helping people dive into their purpose, their sort of reason for being, because, well, I suppose, again, it comes back to my personal experience, knowing that I found the thing that I love doing, or the things that I love doing, and how that strengthened my recovery so much. I really like to help and coach people through that process as well, to help them come to those conclusions, and then work with them to go, okay, well, what's the plan from now? There's lots of bits and pieces, neurological stuff, positive psychology. It really varies on the client. We're all different. We all need different ways to get to the point or the place where we want to be. So the programs are very, very much tailored to that person. Generally, I'll start with an 8-week program, and then we'll go from there. Some people will like to carry on weekly after that. Some people prefer to go down to every couple of weeks. Or some people say, okay, actually, let's check in again once I've reached this milestone, and let's see where we can go from there.
Amazing. That sounds very similar to kind of the work I do. I do 8-week programs as well. And it's very tailor and custom to kind of whatever the individual needs.
Yeah, because we're all different beings, aren't we? It's the same with recovery. 12-step might work for one person, rehab might work for another, and they're such different approaches. So it's the same, I believe, with coaching and yoga as well, to a degree as well. So
I have a question for you. If someone were to be curious about sobriety, what advice would you give them?
Give it a try. Have the courage to try it. Yeah. I don't think I gave myself good enough chances to try. And when I really did and really saw what was on the other side of addiction, which is essentially recovery, I saw the gifts and what an amazing way of living it is. So my piece of advice, would be just have the courage to try, set a goal of a certain amount of time, and then really review it afterwards. I think the reviewing, often we can forget, after a certain point, and I think reviewing can be really important from the perspective of, even the pros and cons of drinking, and then the pros and cons of not drinking. And I'm pretty confident that the cons of not drinking, so often doing both of those lists, can be really helpful.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. And what about if someone were interested in starting a yoga practice? What advice would you give to someone about that?
Yeah, similarly, have the courage to try. It can be really daunting. There are a lot of yoga studios that have lots of fairly challenging asana classes, or people that look like gymnasts and are bending in all sorts of contortionist ways, and it can be quite quite a scary prospect to walk into a room of people that could be like that. So the courage to try, and also the courage and just the courage to try lots of different versions, because there are so many different layers of yoga, whether it's an asana practice, trying a yin class, or going and trying something a little bit more hot and heavy and challenging, or even removing oneself from the asana practice and listening to an audiobook on the lost traditions of yoga, really trying different angles of what this amazing practice is to see which one resonates, and then sort of going deeper in from that angle.
That's amazing advice. Yeah, totally. Because I think it can be so scary. And sometimes you can look at a yoga practice and think, I can't do a headstand, or I can't do the splits, so that's not for me. When really there is like so much depth to it. And so finding the community or the teacher or the practice that resonates with you and inspires you. It's actually very similar, as you said, to the recovery journey. Different things will work for different people, and it's just finding what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many different layers to it. And even, I do really also recommend or suggest that people do dive into the history of it as well as the physical aspect, because it's fascinating and it's thousands and thousands of years old, and it's amazing. There are so many books, audiobooks, Audible actually. There's a couple of really great ones. There's The Lost Traditions of Yoga The Lost Teachings of Yoga by George Feuerstein. And there's another one by Dr. James Mallinson, who speaks it actually himself. He reads his own book, and that one's called The Lost Tradition of Hatha Yoga. Mm-hmm. And it goes through the whole history of where it all started, and it's amazing.
Awesome. Those are great recommendations. I will check them out.
Yeah, please let me know what you think.
So if any of our listeners would like to find you, where can they find you online?
The best place is my website. So that's thewolfefeed.com. And there's lots of information on there on coaching, recovery. There's a few blog posts on there as well about, habit forming and how the brain works in, linked to addiction and things like that. And there's a contact form on there as well. So if anyone's a little bit more curious to find out more, then they can contact me on there, and we can go from there and have a chat.
Amazing. Perfect. And I'll put that in the episode description so that people can just click that link and head over to check you out.
Thank you.
Sophie, it was so amazing to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I was saying right before the episode started recording that you're actually the first guest that I'm having on that side of the world. We don't have a lot of community members from Australia. So I really, it's awesome that you're the first one, and you were a great first guest in Australia. But thank you so much. And I look forward to kind of staying in touch and seeing how your journey continues to evolve.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I've absolutely loved it. And I find it amazing, even though we're in this pandemic and we can't travel, online is this borderless world of connection. Yeah. And it's amazing to talk to you where you are at your time of day, from where I am at my time of day. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope that we carry on chatting at some point. Stay connected.
We definitely will. All right, take care, Sophie.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.